Good afternoon, members of the committee, officers, members of the public. Very warm welcome to this afternoon's Planning Committee meeting. I'm delighted that Cabinet, who are in a cabinet, colleagues in a Cabinet meeting have just arrived, and allow you to gather your breath. I've also had an email from Councillor Poser, who advised that he's just running 10 minutes late. So to ensure that we've got everybody here for the debate, I'm just going to postpone the start of our meeting just by 5 or 8 minutes or so, just to allow other colleagues to join. So talk amongst yourselves for 8 or 10 minutes. Those watching online, time to make a cup of tea, and we'll be back shortly. Thank you. Welcome, Councillor Poyser. Good afternoon, ladies and gents, members of the committee, members of the public. Very warm welcome to this afternoon's Planning Committee. Item 1 on the agenda, please, in respect of apologies.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies from Councillor Goslin. Councillor Tibbets is substituting today.
Thank you. Item 2, declarations of interest. Members, I hope you've passed your forms through to democratic support, but are there any declarations of interest on the committee, please?
I know of the applicant.
Thank you, Councillor Watkins. That interest is noted. Any other declarations of interest? Thank you, members. Item number 3, we had quite a lengthy meeting last time. I appreciate the minutes must have taken everybody quite some time to get through. Any observations in respect to the minutes? Is that an accurate reflection of our lengthy meeting last time? Thank you. I'll sign those as accurate. Item number 4, I've not been provided any Chair's urgent business. And item number 5, I've not been provided any questions from members of the public either. Thank you. Which brings us to item number 6.1, which is the application 7 Lipson Terrace. Amy, you're going to take us through that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. So the application site is 7 Lipson Terrace, located at the end of a private road in the Mount Gold neighbourhood of the city. Lipson Terrace is adjacent to Mount Gold Road and opposite Freedom Fields. 7 Lipson Terrace was formerly known, 7 Lipson Terrace is at the end of an existing terrace, which is a Grade 2 listed building. A group of buildings, sorry. The listing description from 1975 make reference to number 8 and number 7 being combined to make the application property. The existing properties on Lipson Terrace are all within residential use. 7 Lipson Terrace was formerly known as the Mount and was used as a care home. The property, however, is currently vacant and has been since 2019. 7 Lipson Terrace is a large end-of-terrace property with a significant rear extension. To the rear of the property is Landsmith Court, which is a block of flats which backs directly onto the application site. Access to Lipson Terrace is off Lipson Road and is in between 2 Grade 2 listed lodges, as you can see on the screen, with Mount Gold just adjacent to the application site. This photo shows the existing terrace taken from outside of 7 Lipson Terrace looking towards Lipson Road. This is the application site as is existing, which shows that it's number 7 and number 8, but obviously is combined to form number 7. And just next to the property is some gates that provide access to the rear, which provides an existing car parking area. This is the said car parking area, and you can see the extensions that have been approved to the building just behind. The proposal seeks to change the use and convert the existing care home into 14 apartments with associated car parking, gardens, cycle and refuse storage. This image in front of you is just the existing site plan. This shows the proposed site plan, which it proposed to provide 18 car parking spaces to serve the 14 proposed flats. 3 of the spaces are proposed to be disabled spaces with 3 electric vehicle charging points, bin store and cycle store provided. The proposal seeks to change the elevations to a painted render instead of the existing pebble dash, which would be more in keeping with the existing terrace, and to make the existing access wider to allow for access to emergency vehicles. As you can see just on the right-hand side of the screen, the bottom section is showing the existing elevations and the top is the proposed. So you can see from the gates that they are proposing just to extend them slightly. The proposal seeks to remove the existing metal fire escape and ventilation system, clad some of the building, and also input some balconies with some patio doors. So like before, existing elevations are just on the ground, on the bottom there, with the proposed above. Some new windows are proposed at ground floor level. However, due to the tall wall between the application site and the neighbouring property, it's considered that these windows would not impact on the neighbouring privacy. The new windows, I don't know if I can do it, so existing, and then proposed. So you can see we've got along here, there's quite a tall boundary wall between these two units, so we didn't consider there's going to be any impact on neighbours. Because of the levels of the site, also this section here, we've got like a 3-storey, whereas the rest of these are just the 2-storey, and then the existing house has got 3. So this is showing this lower ground unit, which is situated at this unit here. Because of the close relationship that they have with Ladysmith Court, a condition has been added to consent to ensure that all the windows on these side elevation, because Ladysmith Court just backs onto here, will be obscure glazed. The proposal seeks to provide 14 flats in total, 5 of which will be 1 bed, 9 which would be 2. As mentioned, 3 flats on the ground floor are proposed to be accessible and adaptable dwellings, which will be conditioned, which are just shown on the top here. And the first, it will be this unit here, another unit here, and we've got another unit here. And then we've got the 3 car parking spaces for the disabled car parking spaces. The flats are all considered to be of a suitable size. However, it is noted that the proposal does provide a small amount of external amenity space, which does not comply with our guidance. However, given the close proximity to Freedom Fields, it's not considered a reason to refuse the application. We have raised concerns about the details of the cladding from the plans. While no details are given about the specification, the plans do show that it's like a vertical kind of cladding. We have raised concerns about that and said that we don't consider this to be acceptable on a listed building. Therefore, we've added a condition to ensure that we can agree any of the external materials before work commences. It's also worth noting on this site that permission has previously been sought for 17 flats rather than the 14 that's been proposed today. It was refused by the local planning authority due to the lack of affordable housing and failing to mitigate impacts on infrastructure, additional traffic movements given rise to highway safety concerns, inadequate parking provision and insufficient information on the impact on trees, and non-compliance with the 20% target reduction in our carbon emissions. The application was dismissed at appeal, with the inspector agreeing with the local planning authority that the proposal conflicts with policy due to the lack of affordable housing and failing to mitigate the impact on infrastructure, inadequate parking provision and non-compliance with the 20% target reduction in carbon emissions. The inspector, however, did not agree that the scheme would give rise to additional traffic movements that would give rise to highway safety concerns, and considered sufficient information was submitted to determine the impact of the development on trees. To overcome the parking provision refusal reason, the applicant is now seeking to provide 18 car parking spaces to serve 14 flats, whereas the previous application sought to provide 14 car parking spaces to serve 17 flats. The local highway authority therefore consider with this improvement in parking provision that it is acceptable. With regards to affordable housing, the previous proposal did not seek to provide any affordable housing on site and also did not propose to make any contribution towards affordable housing off site. The housing delivery team therefore objected to the scheme, and this was also backed by the plan inspector at appeal. The current application still does not propose to provide any affordable housing on site and initially did not propose to contribute to any off-site affordable housing. They did submit a viability assessment that concluded that it would be unviable for the development to make any contributions. Our council's viability officer considered the viability assessment and agreed with their conclusions. However, through negotiations, the applicant has agreed to pay £50,000 towards affordable housing to be delivered off-site. Policy requires 30% contribution, and 50%, and the 50,000 proposed is equivalent to 3.9%, so is below policy. But the housing delivery team have accepted the offer and having considered the viability of the scheme, and said that while it's a modest amount, would enable affordable housing to be delivered in the city. The Section 106 agreement will include clauses that require the sum to be paid on the commencement of development, and if viability does improve, they will need to pay more. The previous application was also refused to the scheme not providing a 20% reduction in carbon emissions in line with policy. However, with this scheme, they are proposing to provide PV panels and the use of an air source heat pumps, which will deliver a 64% carbon saving, which exceeds policy. This application would bring a currently vacant listed building back into use, providing additional residential units within a residential area. The applicant has overcome the previous reasons for refusal, therefore the application is recommended for conditional approval subject to the signing of the Section 106 agreement. I also have my colleagues Amy here from the Housing Delivery team, Scott from our local highway authority, and Joe, our viability officer, if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amy. We have 2 speakers registered in respect of this matter. Councillor Aspinall, you're first on my list. If you'd like to make your way down, please. Councillor Aspinall, you're very familiar with these proceedings. Would you, you have 5 minutes to speak. Would you like a 1-minute warning? Thank you. Turn your mic on whenever you're ready. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Committee, for listening to me this afternoon. As you've heard, this is a very historic building, and certainly anybody that's been up to Elliot Terrace will notice the photograph up there of the late Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth coming out of this building when she came down to do her Silver Jubilee tour in '77. I have several concerns. I appreciate this building needs something doing to it. It's a beautiful building, it needs to be utilised. But there are several, as I say, several concerns. My first one is the entrance to Lipson Terrace. I know the planning inspectorate said they were very happy, but having nearly witnessed a road traffic accident yesterday with somebody trying to turn into it, I would ask that there is some sort of condition put on it that our road traffic team keeps a close eye on the risks to this. I at least think there ought to be a mirror, one of those beveled mirrors across the road. Traffic coming up from the right, up that hill, come up at quite a speed. All right, I know it's 30 miles an hour, but that is still quite difficult to react to somebody coming out. So that would be my thoughts. Could you think about that very carefully? Secondly, the pavement and the road within that private terrace. You saw from the photograph earlier, it's not particularly brilliant by any means. And I really want to make sure that there is that condition that there's maintenance of that road and that pavement. I mean, you can see the cracked pavements, the line down the middle. There seems to be some discrepancy as to who has to maintain that, but it's a private road, so it will not be our highways team. So that needs to be thought about. And you can see the trees to the left of that photograph. Some limited maintenance has been done on them, but on the terrace side, not on the Mount Gold Road side. And you now have buses coming down there, and you can see that, and there's further down on Mount Gold Road, just really outside of number 6 and 7, the trees are right over. The buses have to come right over to the far side of the road. I appreciate the PCC could chop them down and then charge them for the maintenance of them, but that needs to be something that's conditioned. And all right, I know it's not all on number 7, but we need to be looking at that. The other thing that will happen, of course, is when you have the terrace residents there, if for any reason we go for a parking scheme in Mount Gold Road, I want assurances that they will not be able to join that scheme because they will be outside of it. And the £50,000 affordable housing, which, okay, we may well have to accept that, and that's for you to decide whether you're happy with that small payment for affordable housing. But I would certainly like, whatever pot it is put into, there is some dialogue with the ward councillors as to is there any possibility that that can be spent within our ward. There is another scheme that may well go on down from Sutton Road where we should have got a nice amount from that for affordable housing, but that's actually being earmarked for other areas in the city. And I just think, as the Sutton and Mount Gold councillor, I'm naturally going to say, we want some of that. So that's mainly my concerns. I accept fully that this house needs to be developed. It's going to make a good amount of housing. I'm really pleased from the disabilities point of view that they've got 3 accessible apartments and the parking spaces to go with it. But I do think it comes back to the number of apartments you've got there, the number of 2-bedroom apartments, how many, is 1 parking space going to be enough per flat? And I think there is still that question mark about the number of parking spaces that have been allowed. So I think the other concern is the next door and things that the next the next speaker will be talking about. But we need to be making sure that the drainage is good as well. Certainly you get from the bottom of the site, again, going back to the outside number 7, there can be quite a puddle of water that then leaks out onto Mount Gold Road, which again, icy conditions, not particularly useful for the people walking up and down or just getting off the bus. So that's my ask. So I thank the committee very much for listening, and happy for you to deliberate and see what you can add, see if there's anything you can do.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Councillor Aspinall. I'll allow you to return to your space before we invite the next speaker. Thank you. Dr. Goldhan, here to speak in respect to this application. Good afternoon, Dr. Gohan. You two have 5 minutes to speak. Would you like a 1-minute warning? Yes, thank you. There's a button on the pad in front of you. When you're ready, if you push that and commence. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak here today. I'm the owner and a resident at number 6 Lipson Terrace, so the property directly adjacent to the development. I've lived there for 12 years. Myself and also other neighbors in the terrace, we have in the past objected to this development and submitted substantial evidence why we think it isn't such a good idea to develop 14 flats. However, at this moment in time today, I think certainly me and my family have accepted that something has to happen and that maybe this proposal will go through. So I've come today to just raise a few pragmatic points following on from Mary Aspinall. And maybe I'll just go over a couple of those again, just to confirm that those are really serious concerns. One is the private parking in the road. I think it is very much felt that that needs to be protected to the existing residents, and also there is an existing care home in the road which has got employees as carers coming on a regular basis, so that parking needs to be protected. The other issue is the drainage of the surface water right in the corner there, as Mary mentioned. My husband and I, we regularly clear that out, and it should not be really our task in the future, we believe. Further, the dilapidation of the highways has been taken care of in the planning application already, but the dilapidation of Lipson Terrace itself has not been. Now, we will take the brunt of the development traffic, and we will take the brunt of the future traffic in the terrace. And so that is really something that will need to be sorted out, that there is some responsibility or shared responsibility for the maintenance of the road. Now I'll come to a few more kind of different points, and that is the air source heat pump was mentioned. Now, we couldn't find the location on the planning application where that is, and we would ask that the heat pump is located on the eastern side of the buildings and not in the narrow passage between the boundary wall and our property, because we suspect that that would generate more noise and noise pollution, it being contained between two walls. Now, the point that's really kind of, it's really come up for me in this is a lack of outdoor amenity space, with a shortfall of the required 81 square meters for the future residents of this development. It has been suggested by planning that the nearby Freedom Park is a substitute for this amenity space. I personally believe that it is ill-informed, or maybe not completely informed. Yes, Freedom Park looks wonderful on the pictures that we have seen of the location, but the truth is that the park is heavily used by dog owners, that dogs are allowed to run free, including dangerous dogs, and that Freedom Park and its green spaces amount to a dog toilet. So I'm suggesting that some of the contribution towards a natural infrastructure could be used to create an actual fenced dog training area in Freedom Park, so that the grassland can recover and the park can really serve as a health-giving amenity. Thirdly and foremost, we have environmental concerns about the proposal. I believe that the proposed bird boxes, etc., need to be backed up by actual natural habitats for birds and for other wildlife to thrive. There's no point in just providing boxes when there are no plants and hedges around. So is this my 1 minute?
We've gone past that point, so
okay.
if you could
Let
come
me
to a
just
conclusion,
say,
that would be very
I
helpful.
imagine that what would be really good is to surround the parking area with a thick and high plant boundary, and also to have one large suitable tree planted in the middle of all of that. Thank you. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Dr. Goldhan. If you would return to your place. Thank you. Councillor Kelly, would you mind just hitting the mic button there? There we are. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. In the interest of transparency, we attended a site visit yesterday. I say we, in the company of officers, myself, Councillor Tuffin, Councillor Watkins and Councillor Poyser attended, and the applicant was also present as we conducted the site visit. There were a number of items raised there in respect to the speakers. I'm going to invite members of the Planning Committee to also raise discussions and give you an opportunity to consider responses to those items raised by Dr. Goldhan and Councillor Aspinall. So on my list, I see Councillor Tippett. Thank you, Councillor Tippett.
Thank you, Chair. My question is about the EV charging points. To me, it seems a little bit short-sighted that there's only going to be 3 available for 14 properties, especially considering our city's net zero target by 2030 and the talks of government actually rolling out by, I think it is 2035 now, petrol and diesel cars. So would it be possible to put in the conditions to increase the number of EV charging points to make this a much more sustainable development for the future?
I think if we were going to increase it, we would need to speak with the applicant prior to agreeing any kind of changes to the conditions. We put it as 3 because that's what's 3's been put forward, and our highway authority didn't raise any objections to that. So I couldn't say that we could definitely do that without speaking to the applicant first.
I guess my supplementary would be, how did the decision 2-3 come about? Is there any more detail that you could provide on that?
Is what they've proposed, and in a case of that's what we considered to be acceptable in terms of the numbers of provision.
Thank you. Councillor Stoneman?
Thank you, Chair. I've got two. Do you want me to do them separately? Do one and then come back to me after other people have spoken? Is that?
Quite content. Depends on the length of the question. So let's deal with question one first, and then we see how we get on.
Okay, sounds good. My first one is about the affordable housing of the scheme. I'm quite concerned about the contribution from the developer to make up for the shortfall of not having the affordable housing on site. I've been on the committee for 2 years now, and I've seen on several occasions us approving or not approving applications where the affordable housing isn't delivered on site. And I think it's starting to set quite a slippery slope. So I would like to see more of a contribution in terms of affordable housing if it isn't going to be delivered on site, because I do not think the amount currently proposed is anywhere near enough to make up for the shortfall on site. So can that be looked at, please?
As I've mentioned in the officer report, we came in with the intention of obviously 30%. 30% is what the policy requirement is. They have submitted a viability assessment saying that they can't provide that. And our housing delivery team have accepted that. And our viability officer has agreed that that conclusion is correct. So that's why we are considering that to be acceptable. I know you didn't really ask the question of where we can do more. We've tried to get more, we've negotiated, we've got the 50k as a contribution, but yeah, that's what we can do acceptable.
That's what we were anticipating your question was. Is there more contribution that can be made? Is that what you're asking? That's where we are with the negotiation. Would you like your second question?
If you'll give me the chance to share, that would be much appreciated. Thank you. My second one is in terms of the car parking. I am in two minds about it, but I just want a bit of clarification as to whether my maths is right. So in terms of, we've got 3 disabled spaces and 3 electric charging points, is that correct? Which would leave 12 normal spaces for cars to park in if it were to go ahead, which is 2 under the number of dwellings that are being proposed at the minute. So has any thought been given to the possibility that that is the case, and also is there going to be a policy in place through a condition that the cars or vehicles parked in the electric charging space are going to have to be electric, or can they be used for normal vehicles?
Yeah, through you, Chair. The electric vehicle charging spaces would generally be, like I say, the ideal would be they would be reserved for electric vehicles. However, if members are minded, we could put a condition on relating to a car parking management strategy, which would set out the details of how the internal car parking area is managed, both now and moving forwards, if that would be helpful.
That's very helpful, thank you. You might want to give some consideration to that, Councillor Stoneman, and we'll come back to you later. Councillor Stevens.
Thanks, Jen. I'm happy to second the car parking strategy if excuse me, inclusion if needs be. On the affordable housing aspect, I get the viability principle, but Amy, you were suggesting that there might be changes later down the track were, I suppose, the housing market to improve and therefore the viability figures to alter, which might put a different perspective on things. Can you just explain to us how that's done, and were that to be the outcome, what the results may be in the future and how that would affect?
Yeah, so with the section
were we to vote for it?
Yeah. So in the section 106, there'll be like a clawback mechanism, basically. We've done something similar. We've done it on other similar schemes where we have a viability review. On one of them, we've done it 75% of the occupation of the units. We do a viability review, and if viability has improved, that we can then get more money towards affordable housing.
Is that a standard inclusion in any 106 then that's domestic unit based?
It's not as a standard, it's what we have used it before with schemes like this when we've accepted a sum that's below and they provide a viability assessment saying that it wouldn't apply.
Do we need to take any form, I mean that's great, do we need to take any decision as a committee, or will it just happen as standard, whatever phrase you want to put on it?
It will happen as standard as part of the section 106
Great.
agreement.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Aspinall raised the issue of residents parking in the wider neighbourhood. Can we put an informative on to reflect the view that Councillor Aspinall put forward, which is that were residents parking to be introduced or changed, that this particular property, were we to vote for it today, would be excluded? That's what we would normally do in an area such as this. I'm assuming that's not going to be an issue.
Again, if that's what you're advancing from the committee, I can't see that being an issue. It's been done in previous developments. Amy?
Yeah, no, I don't see it being an issue.
Thanks. And my final point, and thank you for your indulgence, Chair. Councillor Aspinall raised the issue of the junction from the private road onto the highway network. Could we just be, perhaps with you had the overview picture, the aerial picture, yes. Yeah, that's the one, yeah. Could you be clear where we're talking about there? And I think Councillor Aspinall raised the issue of some form of mirror on the other side of the road for safety purposes. So could we just perhaps run through what the options for the committee are, please, with that?
So the junction is just at this location here, which is probably not a great picture because it's hidden from view. Again, that one's not very great. So yeah, it's the picture that I've got where it shows this section here is the entrance from Lipton Road and going in. Again, I don't know if I can really comment on them putting a mirror on, so again, it will be on land that they don't own, and I don't know if it's something that we encourage is to put mirror on. I don't know if Scott wanted to.
Yeah, I'll come in on that point. The first thing to mention with regard to the existing access is that the former use of the site as a 28-bed care home would have generated its own trips as well. So in terms of trip generation, the existing use as a care home would have generated a similar number of movements. In terms of the request for a mirror, we generally find that the DFT don't support the use of mirrors. If you were to go out into the country, into country lanes, you often see them, but they aren't something that's supported by local highway authorities because it can often give rise to more problems than they actually resolve. So from a highway authority perspective, we certainly wouldn't want to see a mirror provided. And the final thing that's worth mentioning is that in terms of accident statistics, there's actually only been one accident recorded in this location in the last 5 years, and I believe it involved an intoxicated gentleman who sort of fell over in the street and almost got missed by a vehicle. So there haven't actually been any vehicles vehicle-related accidents along this section recorded on our stats.
That's okay, but this hasn't been a 14-unit dwelling, has it? So it's like saying, well, something's been empty and there have been no accidents, therefore it'll also have no accidents. You can't make that extrapolation, just as saying that because it was a 28-bedroom care home, of course that generated some car journeys, of course it did. Excuse me, but I think it's a little bit disingenuous, Chair, with respect to say that there won't be a difference having 14 potential separate units, maybe with 2 cars, who knows these days. So I think to say that it'll be a like for like, which I don't know if that's what Scott was sort of implying, I would reject that, and I think there will be an increase. We can perhaps have a difference as to how much, but there will be an increase. So while I appreciate what was said about mirrors, I think we do need to be very careful here, because on the left of the picture there, we've got cars coming up from the valley. We've got cars coming up from town on the right-hand side. We've got cars coming up to a pretty blind junction with, is that Mount Gould Road? I always get those two confused. Mount Gould Road on the right of our picture there with all the cars parked. So I think there is going to be an increase in danger. We can argue how much, but I think to do nothing, I think would be a mistake. So I'm happy to put that on the table and then listen to other colleagues.
I'm grateful, and having, as I indicated, we were on site yesterday. It is a busy road. and turning into that and coming out of it, one has to do so very carefully. So I think you've raised a point that perhaps other members would like to contribute to. So hold one's powder for a moment. Councillor Smith, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just a few things I want to mention. The first one is I just want to acknowledge the comments that were made by particularly Dr. Goldhorn about some of the land outside of the development, and just, I suppose I'm just seeking from potentially from Julie or Stuart or maybe Amy, just for the record, the clarification of what the fact that it's a private road means in terms of what we can expect, because I completely understand the concern about parking in the road, but it's a private road. So we're limited, I'm assuming, in what we can suggest other than potentially an informative that leaseholders consider a parking scheme that excludes number 7 and 8, because obviously there could well be the fact that that property is leasehold. There's complicating factors there, aren't there? So what what Bill has mentioned with the CPZ in Mount Gold is one thing, but the comments that were raised about the other parking, I just think for the webcam as much as anything, and so that we've acknowledged that point, it would be worth just highlighting what that means.
Julie or Stuart, would you like to respond?
Chair, I'll take that. Yes, you're correct. Obviously, with a private road, it is totally different than dealing with the public highway. So there is a limit on what can be done. I don't know the detail of how this is run. Quite often with private roads, it could be split between the users of that road as to the maintenance, the upkeep, and what they do. So. Yes, you are right. There is a limit to what can be done through the planning application on a private road.
So just to expand on that point that Councillor Smith has rightly raised, the suggestion of a car parking management strategy, Jen, then in respect of that, what are the limits in terms of putting an informative on in that respect, which is what our traffic team have suggested?
I think I'm sure Scott will correct me, I think if I understand it, the car parking strategy would be to deal with the car parking spaces within the planning application site at the rear.
Thank you. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. That leads me on to another parking comment or question. So obviously you've got the number of spaces have been allocated with 3 disabled spaces, which is great. And as Councillor Aspinall noted, there were 3 properties conditioned to be accessible. I'm sort of thinking in a big picture here. The condition implies that they don't have to end up with accessible properties, at which point you've got 3 disabled parking spaces in a very limited space. So I think as part of that traffic management strategy, I just think it needs to relate to the use of those properties, because you're potentially stipulating 3 disabled spaces and no disabled person would be able to live in there. And it could be that the visitor spaces are allocated as disabled. Just thinking about the knock-on parking impact, we're potentially restricting ourselves quite significantly. Now, my hope is that you will have 3 accessible properties and need 3 disabled spaces. But the word, so either we need to make the condition more stronger, so that we're actually saying they have to be accessible, or we just need to factor that in. Now, my preference would be that the condition is stronger, but I'm just aware that if not, it needs to be factored into that parking management strategy. Is there any scope to strengthen the condition on the accessibility? Because what we might not be getting affordable properties, but we do need more accessible properties in the city. So if we can use this opportunity to strengthen that, I think that would be a win.
I think, sorry, I'd have to think about the wording of how we can condition it and whether it would meet the 6 test, for one. But with what you said about the parking management plan, that's something that can definitely, you can use to talk with regards to the parking and who gets what and whatnot. So the more standard way of doing it would be via a condition on the parking management strategy. If with the condition, I would probably need to look into it and see about what the wording of that condition would look like, whether it meets the 6 tests, and if it's something that the applicant would also not object to.
Okay, I'll just leave that for a second. We might want to come back to that. I think the other one I just wanted to raise, and again, I might be nicking something that somebody else is going to ask here, but I'm just conscious of that the question that was raised about the air source heat pump. I think that's a really valid point. None of us really know, unless we've got an air source heat pump, what that noise generates, but we do know that when it's up against a wall in a confined space, the noise is going to be exaggerated. If it's not on the plans, do you know where they're going to be? And if not, can we actually make that something that we want to do as an informative or something?
So we've got a condition asking for details of the location and also like the power of the air source heat pump. So I think it may be condition 15 or in there. So, but we've got a condition basically asking for details of that.
Yeah, I think it was a very valid point raised by the speaker in that regard. Thank you. Councillor Smith, I'm going to park you there for a moment. Councillor Kelly.
Thank you, Chair. It's a beautiful building, historic building. It's the applicant has listened on the previous refusals and tried to make amendments. And I suppose my question really, Amy, and I always struggle with this, is looking at the report and based on what previous councillors have said, there are a number of areas where it's not the perfect application. There's lots of shortcuts, shortfalls in the regulations, the stipulations. You know, if we look at number 12, the bedroom, the second bedroom, although it's marketed as a double bedroom, is too small. On point number 13, the second bedroom is too small. We then come to amenity space where the sort of state standard states 95 square metres, but it's considerably less because they've tried to overcome the objection with the lack of parking spaces. So, you know, you're trying to overcome something, but you're trading something off. And I suppose my concern with the affordable housing part, some of the parking issues, but also the quality of the residential development. And I see my sort of role here as a planning committee member to say, if I now bought one of those properties, I appreciate you're going in eyes open, but is it really the quality that you'd expect for the 21st century based on all the guidelines? And prior, it has been refused. So it's a bit of a difficult question for you, but in the totting up process, no single one of those would be a refusal reason, but based on the history and the fact there are a number of factors that don't really meet the ideal criteria, how close were you to saying, actually, I'm sorry? Because to my mind, the simple solution would be that if you had less residential units in that development, you wouldn't need as many parking spaces, the quality and the size of the accommodation would be bigger, and arguably you would end up with a better quality development for people residing in Plymouth and purchasing that. That's my dilemma that I've got.
Yeah, so no, that's fine. So the first one, I think the issue you raised about like the bedroom sizes and the flat sizes can play out because with national space standards, it breaks up into storage space, bedroom sizes, and then the size of generally the whole flat. It complies with the size of the whole flat. It was the bedroom sizes that the thing that was the issue, that was either it was not big enough to be a double or a single, sorry. So I have conditioned it, so it's now in accordance with the national space standards. They can't put in any more bedrooms than what they've done. But in terms of sizes, they are generous sizes. It's a listed building, and they've also incorporated a office into each of the flats, which accommodates like home working. So for me, I do consider that the sizes of the flats are adequate, but yeah, the amenity space is below, but it has close proximity to Freedom Fields. While I get it's not a private amenity space, it's not uncommon for flats to have a very small amount of amenity space, especially in older areas of the city. So yeah, that's what kind of led me to thinking, on balance, I don't have an objection to this, and it's kind of tipped it to be acceptable.
And then, Chair, with regards to point 42, we've got the urban design officer that's raised objections. How much weighting do you sort of apply to that feedback?
So yeah, no, it was considered, but again, it wasn't refused on the previous application based on kind of their concerns, and the inspector didn't raise it again at appeal. So again, I didn't consider it to be a reason to tip in it for a refusal. Like I've mentioned, this is a vacant listed building. It's providing homes within Plymouth. It's classed as a brownfield site. So yeah, again, it wasn't one that I considered that would tip it for me to be recommended for refusal.
Councillor Allen.
Just quickly, I'm not sure if this can be made a condition or if it could just be informative. I'm concerned you'll potentially have residents of 14 different flats accessing Freedom Park for leisure, fresh air, exercise, whatever. Again, coming back to sort of road safety, I can't see that there's a separate pedestrian footpath in and out of the whole building. I just wondered if that's something that could be suggested or included just as a way of trying to make the site safer in terms of crossing the road and also reducing the potential for traffic accidents.
Sorry, so where would you like the pedestrian access to be to and from, I suppose?
Yes, just in and out of the property, because at the moment it looks like residents will have to leave the property, say to access Freedom Fields Park or even to walk into town, using the same driveway that cars will use. And again, I just wondered if there's any way of making that a little bit safer, especially as you've got 3 accessible units and spaces.
So the terrace does have an existing kind of pavement area. Again, because it's not managed, it's privately, one, we couldn't, but also people do park on there, which is unfortunate, but we can't condition it or control it. So this is like the pavement that you can see in front of the property, and that does go all the way up the terrace. And also, I don't know if you're at the street view, we've got some pedestrian access that comes out, and there is a zebra crossing just opposite here. So there is, in my opinion, a safe kind of route towards Freedom Fields.
Thank you. Councillor Tuffin.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just clarify the position, because we've heard it's a private road, but the area where the trees are, the local councillor, Councillor Aspinall, did raise the issue of it's not been maintained, and presumably that's because there's some difficulty about who owns it. So can we just get a better understanding of, I understand the developer has already stated that they're not responsible for that parking in front of there, so one assumes they're not responsible for the trees either. So is there any clarification of who would be responsible for the trees to carry out the points that Councillor Aspinall made? And after that, I have a second question.
Yeah, no, similarly, because it's not within the applicant's ownership, we don't know who owns it. It might be a case of the whole terrace have a joint ownership, but they haven't had to provide those kind of details for us to consider as part of this application. So unfortunately, I do not know who owns those trees or who's responsible for their maintenance.
Okay, thank you for that. So, I mean, that makes it a bit difficult to kind of fulfil the local councillor's view that it's not being maintained and difficult, but I accept that. The other point that the local councillor made was the 106 money. Is it earmarked for housing? Is it earmarked? Or can the local councillors have an input into where that is spent? Please, Chair.
I'll pass it on to our housing delivery team. Amy will answer you.
Thank you for the question. The use of the £50,000, if hopefully paid quickly on commencement, the council has 23 Plan for Homes council-owned sites that it's working to deliver affordable housing on. There are various different stages. We would have a series of options that the process would be that we would put that to the portfolio holder, the housing portfolio holder at the time, to make suggestions for where that money could be spent. We could put a note on my suggestion would be that we could put a note on that record of money to say, have a chat with the local councillors, but we can't guarantee that there's going to be an opportunity for affordable housing spending in the ward, it's very much opportunity based as the money comes in, and we would want to spend it as soon as possible so that inflation doesn't erode the value of the money. So we could certainly put a note and say that those discussions could take place.
Thank you for that. If I could move that the local councillors are consulted on that. I understand that, you know, we can't dictate probably how it's spent, but I think at least consultation with local councillors is important. Finally, Chair, if I may, the front entrance, I think a really good point was made. Is it possible for that front entrance where the vehicles go in and out to be altered to make it somewhat safer? Because I came up the hill and you're on that turning before you can see it. So anyone following you, you're probably going to indicate at last minute. So I think with this change of use, because I do agree with Councillor Bill that it is going to increase traffic. So have we options to make that entrance different or safer? Thank you.
Yeah, unfortunately, because it's outside of the ownership of the applicant, there isn't. But I think it's also worth noting that with the previous application, which was of 17 units on the site, we did have a refusal reason based on additional trips causing highway safety concerns, and the inspector didn't agree with our refusal reasons, so they did remove that on the previous application for 17 apartments. Therefore, again, in terms of this application and in terms of highway safety and additional trip movements, we didn't consider it to be a reason to refuse, given what the inspector had previously said on site.
Thank you for that. If I may, very quickly, is it possible that we have another look at that? Because I understand it wasn't accepted at that first application, but I don't see why we can't be looking at it now.
So I'll come back on that, Councillor Stevens. As the officers tried to explain, the inspector's already determined that matter. Councillor Tuffin, I just want to be clear on, you suggested that we condition it in your exchange with the officer there in terms of a consultation with local councillors and how that contribution is to be spent. My understanding is that a note can be placed on that and the councillor can make representations to the cabinet member or shadow cabinet member in respect of the allocation of those funds. If you're suggesting that we put a condition on that, I think you need to give that some consideration. But as I understand it, the position is an informative note to be placed on the file. But you're welcome to suggest that if that's seconded by somebody else in the committee. But I'll come back to you on that. Thank you very much. I have Councillor Kelly.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of points. The first one with regards to looking at that picture, and others have mentioned with regards to the trees and the, I suppose, creeping nature that it has with regards to buses especially and road safety veering out, but it also looks like a street light there that would potentially be obscured. Not necessarily part of this planning application, but we do have Stuart here, and one of my pet things was sort of enforcement notices. Surely it would be incumbent upon the council to serve the requisite notice, especially if buses are having to avoid that tree growth for safety reasons. So that's one separate issue. My question to Amy, though, just for clarification, and I might not understand it, on point number 7, it says the number of parking spaces proposed are 18, 3 of which are disabled parking. There's also 5 visitor parking spaces to the front of the property. However, the visitor spaces are on land outside the applicant's ownership, so cannot be considered. Could you just show us where they are? Because from a practical point of view, parking clearly has been an issue on this site, and some of the discussion is around there. I appreciate it's not part of the application, but just from a practical on-site application of vehicles coming in, where would those spaces be, please?
So this is the existing site plan, but you can see that they've done, there's 5 spaces, and these are what they propose as additional 5 visitor spaces. These are outside the applicant's ownership, so we can't condition it or not. But from being on site, people have parked in front of it. So again, we can't condition it, we can't enforce that people visit, that put their parking there, but what we've said is, as it is, with all the parking proposed at the back, that is acceptable.
With that photo there, and I appreciate it's a private road, the car on the right would appear to be parked on what I'll call sort of pavement. Is that where those additional 5 are likely to be? So if they were all parked up from a pedestrian's point of view, it would be a little bit sort of not ideal, would it?
Yeah, and exactly, and that's why we've kind of said in the application, in the officer report, we're not considering it because we can't, because it's outside of the ownership. If people within that private terrace wish to park on their pavement, while we aren't going to encourage it, we can't stop them from doing so.
Thank you. Councillor Stevens.
Thanks. Yeah, it was just on the issue of the affordable housing contribution. I seem to remember Councillor Aspinall in her remarks mentioning a scheme in the ward she represents that she thought would be suitable. So I'm just trying to, if possible, to tie it down as much as possible this afternoon. So I'm not an expert on Mary's ward. I hope she'll forgive me on that one, but I'm assuming that the scheme that she mentioned our officers are familiar with. So if there's a way of attaching it, I just think it will be within the spirit of what we're trying to achieve here today.
I very much agree, but I think the purpose of the note on the application, if it's approved, of course, today, I think would serve to achieve that. I see Councillor Aspinall nodding. And I certainly think the outcome of today's discussion, regardless of whether it's approved or not, all parties are now informed that Councillor Aspinall is keen to raise some funds for development in the ward. Is that fair to say? Thank you. Okay. Next on my list, I have Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I just, again, talking about the affordable housing and picking up a bit on what Ian talked about and what Amy mentioned with the note. I suppose it's just worth, I'm just doing this almost just so that we're aware. Within your team, correct me if I'm wrong, comes the empty homes aspect as well. So there is a bit of creativity, I'm assuming, within that 50,000 of how it could be spent. So actually, it could be that in Sutton and Mount Gold, contributions towards your empty homes work could be a good use of that 50,000. So it was just to almost say to Ian, you know, and Mary's nodding her head in the background as well, which is probably completely inappropriate, but I'll acknowledge it. So I think it was just to put on record that within the housing delivery team is both, but I also think it's worth putting on record that we mustn't be setting a precedent, I'm assuming, as the planning committee, that ward councillors get to start stipulating where the money gets spent within section 106, or else otherwise we're setting ourselves up for all of us saying, well, actually, I'd quite like that for mine. So I think, again, just for the record, I'm assuming we just have to be careful that we're not setting a precedent today if we go forward.
The precedent I hope we'll achieve out of today's meeting is more ward councillors will engage with the planning process. Okay, I do have a couple of comments. Sorry, I have you on my list. Sorry, go ahead, Councillor Poyser.
Thank you, Chair. Just on item, it would be 54 on here in relation to photovoltaic cells. So the original application was slightly short of the target for carbon reduction, but then on top of that, the air source heat pumps were added. And I see there's a condition associated with the air source heat pumps, but the new energy statement says that it brings it up to 64% carbon emissions, which I think is really good. And that includes the photovoltaic cell array as well. But the condition doesn't say anything associated with the photovoltaic cells. Is that right, the array? Or is it just on the air source heat pump?
Well, the air source heat pump, that's where we're trying to get the location of them. On the plans here, we have got pictures of the PV, so the PV panels have kind of always been fitted. And what we've also done is added a condition to ensure that it complies with the energy statement. So, yeah, the condition was, so the condition about the air source heat pump is because we want to know where the location is and also the power of it.
So the energy statement itself, they have to comply with that, which includes the photovoltaics as well.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
And just was one of the points I wish to raise, Councillor Poyser, so thank you. Just on that, that condition would also deal with any issues regarding noise. Dr. Goldhan mentioned not only the location but the noise emanating from the pump. That would be taken care of by that condition also, would it?
So yeah, when we get in the condition discharge about the location of it, I think that's where we're going to be able to either negotiate or consider where the location is going to be appropriate. If they submit one and we think the location isn't acceptable, for example, if it's too close to a neighbouring property and noise could be an issue, we could say that this is not acceptable, and then they can come back and provide some further details. So yeah, it will be a consideration when the condition comes in.
Thank you. If I may, I haven't got anybody on my list, so I'm going to just raise one or two of my points, but thankfully a lot of them have been raised. Partridge and Kelly, sorry. I didn't see those. Well, I've got the floor. I'll ask the question. Balconies. During our site visit yesterday, it became apparent that the grey block at the end of the development, the balconies, I felt seemed to be overbearing on the property that's in existence. Sorry, I'm completely disorientated now. Would you mind? Yes, there we are. Those three windows all will benefit according to the plan of Juliet balconies, and I formed the view that that could be quite overbearing on that property with the burgundy roof. Is there scope to condition the balconies that some screenage on the sides to prevent that overbearing aspect? Is there scope with the applicant?
Yeah, no, there's definitely scope, and we can do it so like we can condition it so prior to the use of the balcony, the details of a privacy screen, at least 1.8 metres in height, needs to be submitted and approved by the local planning authority. So yeah, I would advise that you could attach that as a condition.
That's been dealt with. Maintenance of trees. If I can invite you, Stuart, to have a discussion with your team. We had a discussion today about the condition of the trees, particularly impinging or impacting on the lighting. So may I invite your team to investigate whether there's any enforcement issues in respect of the trees that we know are not in respect of this application, but have been brought into the discussion today. Would you undertake to do that, please?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think if the tree is obstructing the highway and the passage of vehicles or pedestrians on the highway, then the powers kind of rest with the Highways Authority. And I think there's provision under the Highways Act for us to be able to serve a notice to do that. So I can certainly liaise with colleagues in Highways to have a look at that.
Thank you. I see Scott nodding. Thank you, Scott. Excellent. Councillor Partridge.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sorry, but I want to refer back to condition 14, EV charging provision. In a city where we're putting EV charging points right across the city, from the centre of the city right out to the far-flung edges, on this provision where there are 14 flats, and as we progress, we're coming to that deadline where diesel and petrol engine vehicles become more scarce than they are now. How are 3 EV chargers going to be served? How are they going to serve all 14 flats equally? Because even if you put dual chargers in, that's 6 for 14 properties. Assuming that going forward, everyone is going to have an electric vehicle.
Chair, I'll come back on that one. As I suggested, the condition about the car parking management strategy, at the moment the applicant's proposing 3, but as part of that condition we could potentially include within that reference to the number of EV charging points, if that would be helpful.
Yeah, that would be helpful. I just see on new builds around the city and in the area, new builds are going up with provision for an EV charging point, be it at the front of the house or the wiring's already installed for a later date. But if these are built without that, it's going to make it even more difficult to retrospectively fit it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Kelly, I think you are last on my list.
Thank you, Chair. Mine's just more for clarification. So it's great that we've got a listed building that is going to potentially come back into use if it's approved. With regards to page 1411, planning obligations, Amy, can you just confirm, in addition to the 50,000 that we've heard with regards to the affordable homes, you've got the £8,992 and £57,181.88 as well. Is that my understanding correct? That's additional funds that will come as a direct result of this application potentially being passed? And could you just clarify with regards to other discussions, the natural infrastructure, where that money might be used?
So yeah, those are other contributions that people have asked for, but because of the viability assessment and because of the viability, they're not being delivered as part of the scheme. So the only thing that is being delivered is the affordable housing. So yeah, regrettably, we're not going to be able to provide, we're not seeking the section 106 on the public health or the natural infrastructure team requests.
Right, so they're all separate entities. So ordinarily, if there wasn't a viability issue, then the affordable housing compensatory part would be a lot higher, and public health would be seeking that amount, and natural infrastructure would be seeking that amount too. But we're not getting any of that.
Yeah.
No. Right, okay.
Thank you. I don't have any more speakers on my list, so I'm going to attempt to wrap up in terms of conditions that have been discussed and invite those individuals, if they wish to expand on that, if my notes don't reflect what they advanced in the first instance. So first and foremost, I suggested a condition around balcony screening would be appropriate for those 3 apartments at the end. Furthermore, Councillor Stoneman and Councillor Stevens were very much in agreement regarding the car parking management strategy. Should be conditioned, and condition as to the usage of the disability parking is for those 3 apartments. Sorry, Councillor Smith, I think you were advancing this. Have I made an accurate note of that?
No, you haven't. I think we just hadn't quite teased out whether we're looking at including that in the car parking management strategy or beef up condition number 16. My preference would be to beef up number 16 and to take out the where practical and just be 3 of those have to be accessible. That's my first option, but I appreciate sometimes you can't force that without a reflection back to the applicant. So I guess I'm looking for advice on whether we can beef up condition 16 here today, and if we can't, then a bit more negotiation potentially.
Yeah, I think with the condition, what we're saying is we're trying our hardest to get that done as a accessible and adaptable dwelling and making sure that they're provided. I can't recall of any where we've changed the wording. That is a pretty standard wording that we have on most of our applications that provide accessible and adaptable dwellings. So to change it, I don't know. I may take it from Stuart maybe. I don't know if we've ever done one where we've made it a requirement.
Sorry, Stuart, before you come back, forgive me if have we seen floor plans that would show where these accessible apartments are going to be, or are we saying, because I think that bit, are they in there? Because if they're in there, then that reassures me that that's more likely to happen. But if they're not in there, then I'm concerned by the wording of that.
No, it's in there. So that's the thing, that like our housing delivery team check it, and they're happy with it. It states on the plans, it shows which ones are going to be the accessible and adaptable dwellings. So they have to build it to the spec. It's whether the occupant basically is going to be.
In which case, I think I'm happy to add that to the parking management strategy discussion, and just make sure that we're not inadvertently losing spaces. But I think it's really clear that the committee from the nodding heads this afternoon are keen that we get those 3 accessible spaces and require 3 disabled parking spaces. Thank you.
Good, I'm glad for the clarification. We've dealt with the local councillors and the potential investigation. I didn't note any further. Councillor Stevens.
I had the suggestion of the informative regarding the CPZ that were want to be introduced. This development residents would be excluded, which I think is what Councillor Aspinall was looking for.
just seeking response on that, Councillor Stevens.
The discussion was at the moment there isn't a CPZ in place. So the informative would be that would be a consideration if a CPZ was to come forward. And as I say, it's an informative, not a condition.
Yes, informative. Thank you. I think Councillor Stevens is content with that. I think that captures all of the conditions and informatives, unless I'm missing something. Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. Members, you've seen the recommendation from the officer in the case, the planning officer, is to grant conditionally, and that is subject to the additional conditions and informatives we've spoken about today. I invite you now to vote in respect of that on your keypads. Thank you, members. That application is approved, subject to the additional conditions we discussed. Thank you. Moving on to the next agenda item 7. We have the enforcement case summary report. Are there any questions in respect of that, members? I'm grateful, thank you. Item number 8, the planning applications decisions, pages 27 to 38 of your bundle. Any questions in respect of those? Thank you. And item number 9, appeal decisions. There were no appeal decisions that needed to be brought to this meeting today. Members, thank you very much for your time. That concludes our business today.